Hi, my name's Simone Bennett. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. Is that audio okay? It seems weird to me, but I'm not used to being on microphone, so that could be why. Thank you for all the thumbs up. Very good. So this talk is about well-architected framework. It'll be a slight intro into the well-architected framework, cloud adoption framework, like miniature in cloud adoption framework, and then talking about how we actually implement well-architected. So if that sounds like a nightmare to you, feel free and scare out or sit at the back and look super bored. It's up to you. That's what I did in one of the talks earlier because I felt bad about leaving, but don't feel bad. So this is me, according to AI, which I quite like. I never get my hair to look that cute, but it's cool. I'm from sunny Brisbane, and I've actually heard tons of people talking about how they came down from Brizzy. So it's like, I was going to make all these jokes about Sydney and everyone honking at you and stuff, but I feel like everyone's from Brisbane, so yep, represent. Lars is from Melbourne, he has to ruin everything. Sunny Coast, yeah. I love like non-cost optimized, insecure, impractical, non-well-architected work vehicles, which is ironic given the topic of this talk, but I feel like it's like a balance in life. So I'm really YOLO in my personal life and then really careful in my professional life. And I've worked in IT since Windows NT. My first MCSE was in Server 2000, which is like a bit embarrassing, but I see lots of happy nods out there. I feel like you all know. My first job was working in primary schools, converting them from NT to Windows 2000 and finding the cable that the rat ate in the token ring network so that the network could come back online. Good times. So I think I just gave up the dig. I snuck in here as an infrastructure person into your developer con, but is there any other infrastructure people? Like you're the SRE team, you're the cloud team. Oh yeah, my peeps. So they're building platforms essentially, and you're building the guardrails and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm guessing the majority of the rest of the people here are developers. You're building stuff, and this stuff's annoying. And yeah, or you don't know, care about it. What did you say? You're a marketing? Okay, amen. Okay. I think you said marketing, that's fine. Cool. So what we're going to talk about really, really quickly, just fair warning, because I actually sometimes feel guilty talking about this because to me it's so dry, but is the cloud adoption framework and the well-architected framework. And I generated nearly all my images with AI, so have fun finding all the weird stuff it did. I was like, whatever, I don't have time to keep asking it to not have the shift left arrow pointing right every single image, so I just went with it. Okay, so this is a Microsoft image. It looks super corporate, but I wanted to talk about how it sort of fits together, first of all. When I started looking at well-architected and cloud adoption, I was like, are these the same thing? Are they separate? But cloud adoption framework is a framework that guides your journey to the cloud. So it's that whole cloud adoption from the very inception where you decide, what's my strategy? How are we going to train our team? What's going to the cloud? What's going to get re-platformed or re-architected? You know, all that stuff, that's all part of cloud adoption framework. And then, so that fits in a box. And then you have the well-architected framework, which looks at a single workload that's sitting on that platform and says, how can I well-architect this? And how can I make sure it's optimized and secure and things like that? And both of these are meant to be iterative. In the cloud adoption framework, that's represented by the govern and manage pillars, where teams like my team make sure that we constantly iterate and keep it most up-to-date with security and most up-to-date with cost optimization and all that stuff. When I talk to Jake in my team, who's a developer genius, I love talking to him, but I expected him to like hiss at me through this whole talk when I gave it to him. He just said, so what? How do I iterate? What is the difference? So I added these slides in. So when we talk about iterating on the cloud adoption framework, we're talking about iterating on our whole platform. So that might look like me adding a new policy for a new security vulnerability so you can't do a thing. It might mean that I change platforms, we change vendors, all that kind of stuff. That's cloud adoption. If you're iterating cloud adoption, it's your whole entire organization. And then if we iterate on the well-architected framework, we're looking at a single workload. So one thing, one stack of things, how do we make it more secure? How do we make it more cost optimized? And the things you do for your one application likely won't apply to the whole platform. So they're not as generic, they're more specific to your workload. And then Jake said, cool, so but what do I care? Like, what do I care? And I said, okay, so the dev teams I work with, typically throughout my entire career, have been motivated by time to value. How quickly can I ship this thing? My KPIs rely on it. I've got a Scrum Master yelling at me. I need to deploy this feature and I need to do it now. And then I don't care about anything else except it works. But then the teams I work in and manage care about it being governed and managed longer term. They want to know, is it backed up? Is it secure? Is it cost optimized? Why is that bill so big? And then that generally leads to a bit of like yeeting things back over and forth over the fence and me saying, no, you can't deploy that because X and Y, or security blocking the deployment. And it kind of just like builds a lot of friction between our teams and creates those bottlenecks back and forth. Or I find oftentimes it creates people just trying to find ways around. So it's just like this constant whack-a-mole game that we play with one another, and it's a waste of our time. But really, we could be one happy family who strives for minimal technical debt. That's a bugbear for all of us, and also minimal rework. So I'm definitely empathetic when I have to say to a dev team, hey, you put this SQL server in, but it's like gigantic, it's not optimized, your increments are like 1 meg, blah, 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 you need to go back. And they're like, oh, I have to go back to the start and re-architect a bunch of stuff. That's not the ideal outcome. It's a really good quote in the keynote saying, be careful of best practices and the people who share them. And I'm about to tell you, lol, this talk's entirely about best practices and the people who share them. So take from that what you will, but I thought it was like a really good intro in the keynote to this talk. So why do we have well-architected? Cool. So Microsoft, when I worked at Microsoft, we have lots of customers, lots of partners. They all have the same problems. You're not alone if you have any of these issues. And then because we went from server, where you had like a best practices guide, to cloud, where I was like, yeah, do what you want. It depends. There's no firm answers. Customers were saying, we just want opinionated best practices that we can say, this is the best practice, we're doing it that way. So they came up with cloud adoption, and they came up with well-architected framework to address things like scalability issues, security vulnerabilities, high operational costs. Like you've all got that bill shock, and 2 months later someone comes and says, hey, why's this cost so much? And you're like, I can't remember why I built it that way. Reliability concerns, resource mismanagement. So maybe you started off working with on-premises workloads where your applications were quite hard to refactor. So you just build a giant server and you had it for 5 years once you got the budget and it was all gravy. But now you have to pay per minute of that server. And suddenly you're not using it very well. Maintenance complexity. You're the only person in the company who knows how to do that thing. So you can never go and leave. And if it goes offline, they're definitely calling you in the middle of the night in India to fix it. Monitoring gaps. So your users are telling you when there's issues before you know there's issues, which is not awesome. Disaster recovery gaps and outages. So we've definitely seen some big outages in the last few months, or 12 months, Optus. And performance shortfalls. So your users just having a bad user experience. It's slow. That reminds me of the SharePoint thing. That's AI. I just said slow application. That's what it gave me. So I was like, yeah, I'll go with that. Anyway, so this is what we ended up. I know this table's ugly. It goes against all the rules. You're not meant to have big lists because people read it and don't listen to you. So just listen to me while I tell you the table. Kidding. I put this in here so you could download the deck, and it has all the links and a summary. So you just got like a shortcut to go to. And these are the pillars that they came up with. And to be honest, the AWS ones look pretty much exactly the same. So no matter what cloud you're working with, I don't know if anyone works with Alibaba or like Oracle Cloud or anything. Anyone? No, I don't know if I know AWS has this because I've done both clouds, but I don't know if any of the other clouds except AWS and Microsoft. But the Microsoft and AWS ones are like remarkably similar. So you have reliability, security, cost opto, operational excellence, and performance efficiency. And I was talking to Wayne in the lift, and he was saying, yeah, I had looked at the well-architected stuff. It's just like this big, huge behemoth full of vague documentation that's like hard to action or consume. And I think that's the feedback the Microsoft team got. So they've gone and redone the well-architected framework docker in the last month or two. They've added a bunch of stuff and they've trimmed it down. It's still quite big, and in some parts it's still quite vague. But there are some really good additions, like the trade-offs. So each pillar now acknowledges that if you're going to have a really reliable workload, it's not going to be super cheap. Or if you want to have a super cheap workload, it's not going to be very reliable because you don't have all those extra instances and stuff running. So the trade-off column helps you figure out, where do I want to compromise in one pillar over the other? I think that's a really good addition to the doco. And I think they've tried to, summarize a little bit as well, so it's a bit less reading. I have to say, I don't really leave the house ever, except to go to gym and then come home, and I don't talk to anybody. So being in this much public for this many days has got me really amped. So I feel really short of breath. So apologies if I seem like I'm panicking. I am, but it's cool. So the first pillar we have is, oh, I skipped one. No, I didn't. I don't know what doing. Cost optimization. So we'll go a little deep dive into this, and some of the stuff might seem slightly off track, but there's some things that when I talk to you about with customers and partners, they're just always surprised. So I put them in there. We have performance efficiency, which is like designing for scaling, load testing, and optimized workloads. And I don't know if you have heard of that meme where everyone's like, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? Yeah, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? A lot. Yeah, like apparently you all are thinking about the Roman Empire like every week. I didn't know this. It's amazing to me. Because I think about the Roman Empire zero. Like never, ever do I think about the Roman Empire. But do you know what I think about every week? Ticketek and Ticketmaster, because every time I see a sale, you can't freaking buy any tickets, and it's always like on the news and in the radio, and it's like, why don't they just scale that? Like they knew everyone wants Tay-Tay tickets, right? So why can't you buy them? And then my teammate Ryan said, oh yeah, but you know, maybe it's perceived scarcity. I did a marketing degree, that makes sense. Maybe they want the hype. They want you to be like having a party and everyone's at your house and you're all trying to buy tickets and it's on the news. But then some products, you want them to buy it like more than one time. When it's Taylor Swift, you might, you know, handle that because you really want those tickets at one time. But if it's like your app that tells you when the bins go out or some product that you sell, you want people to be able to come and buy it and then come and buy it again and again and again and again. That's how capitalism works. So perceived scarcity works well for, you know, things like that with the hype, but maybe not for everything that we're building every day. And that leads me to a really good example of that, which is Skims, which I'm sure you all know is Kim Kardashian's loungewear company with all these cute outfits that you can buy that match your partner, and they even have little ones that match your dog. And recently they had this Valentine's drop with all these Valentine's themed outfits that you could buy, and you could have a little matching family like your Christmas ones, you know? Anyway, they really hyped it up. They had like Dua Lipa and Lana Del Rey and who is it? Usher, like posting on their Instagram, like hyping it up. Anyway, they dropped the collection and I was just watching my social media just explode because as soon as they dropped it, their website crashed. And everyone was like, I can't buy my matching Valentine's outfit. This is the end of the world. And then Kim Kardashian's posting on her Twitter being like, oh, we're getting it working. And I was thinking, once again, what, did you think no one's going to buy this? You've been hyping it up for months. Just pre-scale or do some load testing or something, right? It's like, why is this so hard? And everybody agreed. So Alyssa was like, I love you, Kim, but really. Kylie was like, you're a billionaire. Can't you buy some scale sets? Kendall was like, I will jump off my roof if I don't get to this to start working. And then she's super happy about it because people are insane nowadays. And then Michaela was like, if I don't get to match my dog Valentine's Day, I'm going to have a full-blown mentee bee. And I was thinking, oh, Michaela, I don't like your chances because that website was down for 9 hours. And it just kept going. Find the post. It's hilarious. Like the comments are just people flipping out, which leads me well to reliability, which is where we define the business requirements, like in that trade-offs column, where we talk about resiliency, availability, and recovery. But reliability isn't just about being up, right? It's about the thing working. So in the old days when I used to monitor websites with a ping test, it was only half the picture because the website's up but the database is down. So all you're getting is a website that you can't use. So just because it's available doesn't mean it's reliable. And that goes for Skims. So they got their website up after 9 hours and then their backend wasn't working, I think, or their stock management or their e-commerce provider because no one could buy anything, or they were getting notices saying, yep, you bought it and the money comes out but then it's out of stock, or they were getting empty boxes in the mail, which is like a packing slip in there. And I was like, someone do a mental health check on Michaela because she gets an empty box. Oh. Anyway, so just because it's up doesn't mean it's working. And I stole this analogy from one of the Microsoft guys because I straight up could not think of my own. I was trying really, really hard. If you have a good one, please tell me so I can steal it. But availability is like having a car with a spare tire. Reliability is knowing how to change a tire. Reliability is having a jack to change a tire. And even the things that I do, I just call RACQ, availability. And then also maybe knowing that after an hour of trying to change a tire, you should have a backup plan. So maybe take a taxi or not an Uber, take a taxi, or take a bus or whatever. Have a backup plan. So have a full resiliency plan and be reliable, not just available. Operational excellence is where we talk about holistic observability. So we have reliable, predictable, automated deployments, which I'm sure you all have. And for me, that falls into that new buzzword that's re-emerged around platform engineering and paved paths. So we're trying to just have these templates in place. I've heard some differing opinions over the last week, like we hate templates, we hate paved paths, we hate opinionated designs. But for me, in the infrastructure space, that works really well. And then we have security. We all know what security is. I'm not going to spend ages on security because I think it's the one pillar of the well-architected framework that's already been covered really heavily, especially in the dev teams where they're saying, build security at every level, and there's really good DevSecOps tools that already exist and a whole practice around DevSecOps. Oh, everybody wave to the camera. Look happy, you're excited, yeah. Cool. Cool, so with well-architected, that's the pillars. And then I go talk to customers about this and they're like, this is amazing, thank you so much. But the common problems I see, they don't say that. They're just like, okay, cool, how do we fix it? Is at a point in time. So for example, recently I was talking to a startup and they have this cool app in New Zealand and they have one customer and it's going really well and they're ready to just, bomb the market with it and get heaps of customers. But the infrastructure they've built costs so much to run that if they add one more customer, they can't actually afford to run anymore. So they're like, we need to cost optimize our environment before we sell any more things. And so great, we did a well-architected review, we resized a bunch of stuff, we optimized it. But it's like they'll do that one time and then probably not think about it until something else goes wrong. So it's a big problem with well-architected if you do it when there's an issue and then you never reiterate on it and you never think about it unless something's broken. And then sometimes people say it's massive and it's too big and it's hard to understand and it's not actionable, which is totally fair. And some people say it's just annoying. It's a point of friction between our teams. It blocks what I'm doing. It's a bottleneck. Also fair. So in my career, I've been trying to think, okay, well, how do I solve that stuff? Because I'm a problem solver. Some people say if you're a problem solver, you're a people pleaser, which I guess makes me feel attacked. But anyway, we want to push quality upstream. And I know there's been a common theme of like, we are burned out. We don't want any more stuff on our pile, which is fair. So I tried to think of ways to not make more stuff on your pile, but to still push quality upstream. Instead of pushing it downstream, where you need to rework things. So you build your thing, it gets to prod, the security team says no, and you go all the way back down the snake to the start again. And we want to collaborate. So I don't know if you have, who has like a platform team or a security team, networking team, or are you just like, oh yeah, cool. Everyone else is just like, it's you. Oh, okay, so this stuff is like relevant to you. Awesome. Well, you can collaborate with each other and me anytime you like. But in practice, shifting left is more about shifting the burden rather than the ability. And I've definitely heard that sort of theme over the last few days in all the talks I go to where I feel like a little imposter. And I don't want that to be the case. So if we think, okay, we want to push quality upstream, we want to make those decisions early so we don't have to go back and do them again. How do we do that? We want to make sure it's not about more cognitive load for dev teams. And we want to embed the well-architected pillars directly into our development process, if we can. And then if you're still not really sold on the whole shift left thing, or you're like, it's just more work for me, there's a really good blog on Pragmatic Engineer about the Skype for Web team. I had a little debate with Adam the other day, who's in the corner over there. I said, I thought Skype was awesome compared to Teams. And he said, no, Teams is excellent. Skype was awful. So tell Adam later in the corner who's laughing sheepishly if you don't like Teams on the way out. He works for Microsoft, so he can give that feedback. Anyway, Skype for Web, they had a testing team, they had a dev team, and like every other team, they build the thing, they yeet it over the fence, testing team says, nah, it doesn't work, yeet it back and forth, back and forth. Really long process to have stuff deployed to prod, really long process for new features to go live. And everyone was kind of angry and annoyed all the time at the delays. So they moved their teams together and they had just a dev team. And the dev team maybe didn't do all the testing, but the testers and the devs worked together. So the testing team understood what the devs were doing and why those decisions were made, and the dev team understood what the testers were trying to test for, and like preempt those problems later on. So that's my example of like shifting left working quite well. I meant to say, sorry, that I got distracted by Dev Smackdown coming in. I said, come on in, I won't be distracted if you're late, and then I was. But for the Skype for Web team, they had better developer satisfaction, they had happier teams, and they went from having week to month-long feature releases to having daily feature releases. So it's a really good example of how when you work together and when you make those teams closer, and build empathy between them and think about stuff at the beginning, you can reduce friction and delays. So just a little pause. So far we've talked about Cloud Adoption Framework at the most high level, well-architected pillars, and shifting left as an idea. And we all learned that Skims sells cute little dog hoodies that you can buy to match if you want. So where do we start? What's next, right? That's all good, but just like the documentation, so how do I do it? There's a couple of ways you can get started in making sure your workloads are well architected. The first is the go live assessment or the well architected review. So with the go live assessment, that's aimed at something that's about to go live, like the app I was telling you about before with the startup in New Zealand. You're about to go live, are we ready? It's a really thorough checklist. You get your team together, you buy some snacks, and you go through it. And the quality of the answers you give it is going to determine the quality of the recommendations you get out of it. If you have a workload that you've adopted, like a lot of times I get plopped into a customer to just be like, figure it out, what's wrong? That's where the well-architected review works well. Or if you buy a company or you start at a new place, well-architected's like, what have we got here? It's a bit of an audit, gives you a good baseline. And from there, you fill out the questionnaire and then it gives you like a big CSV full of recommendations. I usually organize them by pillar, if I care, like say they've got a cost at the top of their list, or I organize them by criticality. And then you'll get like thousands of recommendations. I normally just take the top 10 or scroll through for any low-hanging fruit and work on those, put them in my backlog, and then commit to reiterating on that later and doing it again once we've knocked those things off the list. One thing I really like about the well-architected review is I was in Magnus's talk earlier and he was saying it's super hard to get bean counters to care about any of this proactive work because it's not features. So with the well-architected reviews, you get a score and it says you're excellent at this, you're terrible at this, security's, at this level. And you can show that tangible improvement when you do that work. So it's a really good way to show the management team or the bean counters that you are making improvements and that Microsoft says you're in a better place now. This is what they look like on the web page. That's the well-architected review for the existing workloads and the go-live review. But if you're building other things, there's heaps of reviews in there that are scoped just for that workload. For example, there's one for AI workloads. So if you're building AI workloads for the first time, which I think we all would be, you could do the AI well-architected review and you could get some tips on where you should tweak things or where it's not well-architected without having to learn that stuff the hard way. If you're like, but wow, I hate doing this stuff, it takes long, I can't get my team, rah, rah, rah. That's cool, I hate that stuff too, but I still do it because it's my job. But Azure Advisor is an excellent tool because it's already there in your portal, enabled, it's free. It goes from 30 days worth of data that's been, things that have been running in your environment, and it gives you instant recommendations that you can action right now. The difference is it can only give you recommendations about stuff that's running in your portal. So it's not going to say, do we have a disaster recovery process? Because you can't tell that by looking at your portal. So it's not as thorough as a review, but it's a really, really good place to start. And once again, if you want tangible things that you can show your team or your managers to say this work is worthwhile, you get an advisor score. So that's all the pillars put together. And I think you would always aim for like a base of 75 as a good starting place. And if it's below that, it's a really good business case to go say, hey, we've got a terrible well-architected score. We need to prioritize some of this work. And then it's broken down by pillar. So this is a customer we're working with at the moment. And as you can see, they've got great results in reliability, operational excellence, and performance. We recently did a bunch of work with costs, so reserving instances and stuff. So that score improved. And I think you can see that security is probably our next target for them. But in this case, they actually have a bunch of security that's in their on-premises environment they've extended to the cloud. So our next task is actually to go into Advisor and say ignore those recommendations so their score really reflects what they have in place. It's not that bad, but it can still. I find the score's pretty good for managers because you get all the pretty graphs and you can show them all the recommendations. But what would you like? What would be more tangible in a? Like cost one, save this much money. Or yeah. Performance, like we went 10 times faster. Yeah. And so, well, the cost one, it tells you like literally this much dollars. And if you go into the pillars, they do have like more detail. Like if you change this, you're only using 3% of that CPU. So maybe resize that instance. So it does have like more detail as you go in there, yeah. But the cost one's obviously the easiest because it's like, hey, do you want more cash money? And they say yes, and you go, cool, well, let's do these things. But in my entire career, like it's been super hard to make an argument for business to do backups or anything like that because they don't care until something goes wrong. So I always like to say to customers, they go, oh, we don't need to worry about that. I'm like, what if I just go Cocoa Bananas right now and delete all your servers? And they're like, oh, no, yeah, like that's what could happen. You know, like they don't think about it until it happens. Okay, so that's the pillars. We're going to dig into the pillars now. Did that make sense? Is everybody in the right talk? Cool. Operational excellence, that's one of the pillars. And for me, it's simple. It's build a well-architected stack. So think about those pillars at the start. Get that base well-architected, whether it's your workload or your platform, and then keep it well-architected through iteration and guardrails. There's a really good blog by Kelly Shortridge where she says, you should build standardized patterns because our common enemy, every time I practice, I couldn't say that line, is unintended behavior. And I would agree. It is unintended behavior, the one thing we want to avoid. And I went to Adam's talk the other day and he said the same. He said, we want to build templates. We want to use things like code spaces in DevBox. We want to build paths that are already pre-approved by security or the platform team already has tweaked for you. And in this case, most of all, it's you guys probably, but still you can have it well architected, have a template, and then you don't have to think about it. And you can just keep using it over and over again. We want to bake it in out of the box. At Arcana, my job is to build landing zones. In Magnus's talk earlier, he said landing zones are pretty much just a subscription, which I disagree with, but I'll just explain what landing zones are to make sure that's not what everybody thinks. So at Arcana, we build paved paths or platform engineered landing zones for our customers, and then our dev team can plot whatever they want on top, like little puzzle pieces. So we start off with management groups, which I don't know if anyone ever used group policy, but it's pretty much the same in my mind, but it's like folders or a way to organize your resources and apply guardrails to those resources consistently. Then we have a subscription for connectivity, identity, and management. That's Cloud Adoption Framework aligned, but for small ISVs or little startups, we might condense those subscriptions down into one. For two reasons. It's pretty much the same team that's going to manage it all, so you don't need that boundary of permissions. But also there's very little chance that they're going to hit the constraints of that subscription because they're small. If you're building it for a large organisation who's like, I'm just starting, it doesn't matter, they will hit the limits of those subscriptions and they will have to build new ones and migrate all their stuff at a point. So it's best to build their stuff now scalable, even though it seems like overkill, and then never have to redo it later. We build in the govern and manage as part of our platform deployment, so things like logging and monitoring and alerting and security and all that kind of stuff we build in. And we build subscription vending, so you fill out a few lines on a pull request template and you say, what's a workload, who owns it, where do the alerts go to, what should the budget be, click merge, and it deploys a subscription with all that stuff built in for you. Action groups, Azure Advisor alerts, so the digest for those every week, the critical alerts get sent to you, service health alerts from Azure, budget alerts based on what you specified as your budget, for example. And together, that makes up a landing zone. So I guess there is subscriptions involved, but it's slightly more complicated. And it looks really scary in the Microsoft documentation when you look at that landing zone image, this huge, big, blurry thing, but actually when you break it down, it makes sense, I hope. And then there has been some talk at this conference around dev test subscriptions, which are great. They're much cheaper than normal subscriptions, but they have a lot of caveats around them. So dev test subscriptions are a much more cost-effective way to do your sandbox work, but they don't have SLAs, they're ephemeral, they might turn off stuff if they run out of resources, so don't use them for anything that's like important, but for your sandboxes, it's great to use those NPN or dev test descriptions. Okay, so how do I build pave paths platform engineering? Hopefully I've convinced you it's a great idea. I use Terraform because I'm Team Terraform, but you can use Pulumi, ARM, Bicep, I don't care, whatever you use, PowerShell, but just have code that has your infrastructure as code. So A, your team can see what's there, or someone new in your team can see what's there, and it can be repeatable and standardized and automated, and whoever in your team deploys it has the same standard as you would have. How do I get started doing that? That seems hard. Cool. There's Azure Verified Modules. It's a new thing from Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework team, where they're like pre-configured platform modules in ARM, Bicep, or Terraform. And you can go in there and say, I want a SQL database, and it has like the stack for a SQL database as a verified module. The product team at Microsoft has to own it. You can contribute them. So you could say, I'm going to put my SQL stack in there, but the product team at Microsoft has to own it and like approve it and make sure it's maintained and stuff like that. There's the Azure development environments, which are kind of like the dev test subscriptions, but with pre-configured stuff in there that you can build templates, and then the rest of your team can just deploy the template. And then there's the developer CLI environments, which are all the rage. But the thing I don't like about them is that oftentimes you just bypass having a CI/CD environment, right? So you go ahead and be like, I'm just going to deploy this locally. There's no deployment gates. There's no linters. There's no change control. You come to me and say, oh, our stuff got hacked. Can you tell me who's in there? I'm like, I didn't know that exists. Where's the code? Like nothing. It's just YOLO'd into the environment, which I don't dig. But some of the CLI things, you can have it create code and you can put it in a repo, and then you can use CI/CD to deploy, which I would suggest. The CI/CD I like to use is GitHub or Azure DevOps if you like. But again, I don't care. Use whatever you like, but put deployment gates in and have pull requests and have your team be able to see what's happening in your environment and support it if you're not there. Okay, so that's cool. I love infrastructure as code, but I have an environment that someone ClickOps and I have to support. Or I just started a new company, it's all ClickOps. That's okay. There's tools that you can use to write your ClickOps environment back to infrastructure as code. There's AZTF export, which used to be called AZTerrify, which was much more fun in talks to make jokes about. But then it went GA and they gave it like a proper name, which is annoying for my personal talks. And then there's AZOps. AZOps is cool if you're using ARM or Bicep, and you can run it as a job and have your environment written back to code periodically to catch that. Terraform has a thing in HashiCorp Cloud called drift detection that does a similar thing, but that's not free, right? These are. This is a representation of me in the olden days when I was a sysadmin, and developer teams would come to me and say, oh, we need a whatever environment, and they fill out a form or log a ticket, and then my team would build the thing, they'd fill out our checklist, and I'd make sure they filled out the checklist, and then we deploy it, and we were like a bottleneck. And I knew we were a bottleneck, but we needed to be a bottleneck as well because we had a bunch of, regulations we had to comply with and business rules we had to comply with. We couldn't just put a server there and leave it go. Yeah, she's angry. She just went and cried up to... Anyway, I told you I was like tired of the AI by the end. I was like, cool, do whatever weird thing you want, I don't care. But yeah, so I knew I was a bottleneck. But what I love about cloud and what I loved about group policy back in the day is I could just automate those guardrails, right? So now I can let you click that pull request, vendor subscription, get all the stuff that I want you to have in there, like alerting and budgets and automated backups by using Azure policy. So I automate governance in our landing zone. As soon as you build it, if you have a virtual machine that doesn't have a backup, it creates a vault and creates backups. As soon as you create a resource that doesn't have tags, it filters tags down. So it's like you don't have to think about it that much, but it does happen. And so I'm happy and you're happy, and there's less of a bottleneck where I have to go manually make sure that stuff's occurring. If I'm not convincing you, I saw lots of people hating on guardrails the last few days. Stripe. When Stripe came out, they did the little, little square tappy thing that you get like at the cafe or the markets or whatever. They had a big outage and they lost heaps and heaps of customers because for a little business, having no tap and pay for hours means pretty much a whole day's pay is lost. And so they adopted a system of making sure they had strict guardrails in place. And I really like a quote in the article about their environment where they said, they build systems where the easiest path is the safest and most reliable one. And I think that is the key to this whole talk, right? Make it easy to make that thing well architected. Build it in at the start. Don't make it something that's annoying that happens once the thing's deployed and you have to go back and comply. Just build it in and make it the easy path. It'll make it hard to circumnavigate, I guess. Anyway, it's a really good article if you're interested. So this is our landing zone, and I just wanted to say this is where we would deploy our guardrails in the management subscription. You can deploy them wherever you like, but if you're doing a CAF-aligned landing zone, that's where they go. And as I said, the way I do that's using Azure Policy. The Azure Policy portal is a bit confusing, but if you want to go have a look in there, if you've got permission, that's good. But one thing that a lot of dev teams I work with complain about is, cool, you give me this subscription, and I'm putting stuff in it, and stuff's automatically happening, and I don't know where it's coming from, and I maybe don't want that to happen, or I can't troubleshoot my thing. So the answer to that, in my opinion, is to have policy as code, just the same as you should have your infrastructure as code and your AZD stuff as code in a repo. You should have your policy as code so that people can see what policy is applied to their environments by default. And if I change a policy that says, okay, you can't deploy to Australia East as a region, you can see that recent pull request, maybe even make a pull request to correct it, or at least there's some change control that you can self-serve and see what's happening. If writing policy as code seems like a nightmare, that's cool. Microsoft has a repo with like tons and tons and tons of reference policy that you can just clone and start using. What time do I have to go to? Anyway, we're just going to keep going. We'll be fine. I had good intentions to set a timer, but I didn't because I was too nervous. So cost optimization. This is a big one, and it's the one thing that I get asked for help with a lot. I guess, in my opinion, that's because cost is not visible to us when we're building stuff. So when I'm architecting a workload, I'm thinking, oh, is it compliant? Is it reliable? Is it, tweaked for performance? But I'm never thinking, how much does that cost? And in the talk I was in earlier, they were talking about these great tools from Microsoft, and some said, oh, how much does that cost? And they didn't know because we don't think about that really day to day. And it's the same with our dev teams, right? You just build stuff for the things you care about, but cost is not visible to you. And sometimes it's not visible even if you try to go find out. Like in the portal, you might have access to the billing subscription, and you might not be able to see where's the cost coming from. So I hope Ryan doesn't mind being the star of the show. He is my team, but there's a really great tool, and sometimes I give talks like this, and this is literally the thing people love. I just put this on the screen and go, but it's called InfraCost. It's a free tool, and what it does is put the cost of what you've built into your PR as a comment. So when you build something new, Ryan made some changes, and it's going to be $239 more than it was before. So he can have a look at that and say, oops, I didn't mean for that to cost $239 more. Oh, yep, that's totally reasonable. But it puts it right there when you do your pull request. It makes it visible for you to make better decisions really, really early on. That's not close enough to the start. Oh, can you see that okay? Is it blurry? It has a plugin for VS Code as well. So when you build your instance in the VS Code, it shows you how much that's going to cost. Normally everyone's like, oh, wow, when I get to this, but thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you. Oh, no, you don't need to clap, but yeah, thanks anyway. Like literally people are normally like, oh, that's sick. But anyway, that was my big reveal. Yeah. Anyway, if you don't use Terraform, if you're using ARM and Bicep, that's fine. There's an equivalent to Adam loves Bicep and Teams. Who knew? There's Azure Cost Estimator, and that's written by, I think, one of the Microsoft guys write this one. It's free also. It doesn't have a VS Code plugin, but it goes into your pipeline just the same. So if you want to make costs visible to your teams, whether they're infrastructure or app, and you want to see what you're building and how much it costs, you can use those tools. Tagging is super important for cost management. I'm not going to spend ages on this, but there's one tip I'll give you, and that is that there's more than 2,000 resources in Azure, and only 625 of them can be directly tagged. And that's often a problem for the customers I work with because there's all this stuff that costs money and they don't know where it belongs or why it's costing money. The best answer I found to that is this new preview where it's called Tag Inheritance. It's an Azure policy, and you say whatever's inside the resource group gets the tags from the resource group. And that lets you tag heaps more resources for cost management and reporting purposes. Super easy to deploy. It's one of the few policies I generally might put in at that root management group, just so that you can do better reporting. Yep, that's pretty much what I said. If you have your policy in audit mode, also you can set up alerts that email your team and say, hey, these things are not compliant. So if you don't want it to apply, you could also say these resources didn't get tagged or don't have a budget or whatever. And this is really, really off track, but it's another thing that people often surprise, and you can save, well, for that customer I was talking the other day, we saved nearly $20,000 a month by reserving stuff they didn't realize they could reserve, like storage. So everything on this screen can be reserved. Normally when I talk about reserved instances, people say, I don't have virtual machines, and also it's too hard. But you can reserve all of this stuff. So if you're using any of those things, go into the reservation portal and see how much money you could be saving. This is a list of the ways I generally just work through to optimize costs when people say it costs too much. Automated things like Azure Visor recommendations, super easy. It's there to start. It's low-hanging fruit. Scheduled shutdown. So use those tags, all your environment tags, to say this stuff can shut down, and maybe have a cron job or a GitHub action to just turn it on as you need. Then when I'm looking even further to save costs, say for that customer in New Zealand, I get right down into it around decomming things and right-sizing things. And one thing that I think we often don't think about is tuning our applications to have better performance efficiency. For me, that's tuning things like SQL and, the infrastructure stack. But for you guys, it could be, all the way through to your application. There's a really, really, really good talk by Sahir Patel, and he talked about how we don't have a ton of regard for the performance per unit of compute that we're buying, and how we just have been able to scale infinitely. So we do, if we can just use as much as we want, and so we don't think about, could our application be more efficient? And I think that leads really well into this example from Honeycomb.io, who also just changed their CPUs to ARM-based CPUs and saved 30% of their costs. So sometimes I think we think about all that cost management stuff I have in the list, but we don't think about, could my application stack be better, or could I just switch to a newer version of the hardware that's way more performant for a cheaper price? For example, if you're running like really old server operating systems, you would be paying out the nose for them now, and you could just move to a newer version. It'd be much cheaper. Which leads me into performance efficiency and reliability, which I squished together because they mesh together a lot in my mind. And performance efficiency is really how you can save money as well. On reliability, I want to say props to the Twitter team, right? You can't plan for every eventuality, but they did a pretty good job. I don't think anyone even works at Twitter anymore. I definitely read that there's like no power, you can't get in the building, he hasn't paid rent, but Twitter's still working. It's like mostly still working. And that to me is props to this SRE team who probably aren't even there. That application is just like self-healing and self-running and self-monitoring and just chugging away. Like when the world ends, Twitter's probably still just going to be working. And they have a really good blog where they talk about what they did to get to that. And it was around deployment and testing, large event planning, ticky-tack, and monitoring. So if we look at those, testing, I like to put it into my pipelines wherever I can. I think most people would be familiar with linters and testing in your pipelines. And if you need help writing tests, Michelle did a really good talk the other day about using Copilot to just write them for you. So don't be scared of writing tests anymore. One of the examples I like to use in our team is TF-Lint. I have it in my actual GitHub VS Code, my VS Code locally. TF-Lint checks all this stuff for you before you even push your PR to the repo. My brain just stopped working. I don't know what's going on. But it checks all these stuff like, oh, you can't have that kind of name for a scale set, or that's an invalid value, or there's variables that you have declared but you're not using, and it just optimizes your code and checks a bunch of stuff before you push it. So it saves a lot of rework, and it's really good. Checks for secrets, all that stuff. I really like it. But you can also put it in your PRs. So if you don't have to rely on people having it installed on their machine, you can put it into the PR. When we do subscription vending, we also make a code space template for our customers, and we put all this stuff in there so it's just there when they start, trying to figure out how to build things. And then if you need help with tests and well-architected tests specifically, Bernie White in the Brisbane office has this thing called PS Rule, and it is like all these pre-made tests that are well-architected aligned that you can use. You can make a library of them and then just reuse it for all of your repos if you want. You can contribute to it as well. He's got heaps of videos on how to contribute, and he's super friendly and nice. I even contributed something to it, and I was like, took me ages to learn how, and I just contributed one thing for the hackathon. Anyway, it's an awesome tool. Check it out. Free as beer. If you're like Skims, they probably could have taken advantage of Chaos Studio and load testing, right? So load testing creates that synthetic load, so you can test that your website can auto-scale or handle it, or your application can handle that load that you're trying to create. And then Chaos Studio, in my mind, the best way to explain is like that Netflix Chaos Monkey that everybody has heard of. It's pretty much the same deal as that. Like it creates random faults in your environment. And then if you're like the Twitter SRE team, your environment should just keep on going. Monitoring, if you want to know what's happening before your users tell you what's not working, you need monitoring. And we use Azure Policy to create monitoring automatically for each subscription that we deploy so that people don't have to think about it so much. If you want to do the same thing, there's a great repo called Azure Monitor Baseline Alerts. It's owned by each product team at Microsoft, and they approve the monitoring alerts in there. It's I think it's in JSON and Bicep, so you can just create that as policy as code for your subscriptions and push it out like guardrails so everything is monitored automatically. I promised Liz that I put this in. Sigil is our product. No, I promised Jake I'd put this in. Sigil is what we do this as well at Arcana proactively for our customers. And open telemetry is when you're writing your application, think about how you're going to instrument the application. What stuff does somebody who's using it or managing it or owning it need to know about the application? Like .NET works really well in Azure and all the monitoring tools because they thought about the instrumentation. They thought about, what do I need to know about that app to make sure I can tweak it and keep it running? So open telemetry is a really good way to build that into your apps so they're not just a black hole of stuff that you can't tweak and optimize. Oh my gosh, I don't know what the time is because I forgot the timer, but we're at the last one, security. And as promised, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on security because I think it's talked about really heavily and everybody knows a lot about it. But I saw a blog the other day that said 81% of developers admit to shipping software with vulnerabilities just to meet a deadline. Just seeing who looks guilty in the audience, a few of you. But no shade because that's what you're incentivized to do, right? People incentivize you to work fast and they don't incentivize you to try and make sure things are secure until something goes wrong. But I thought you might like to join me. My motto in life is just don't be on the news. It's the only thing I care about. But no matter what I think about, I think, oh, that's kind of risky. Would I be on the news? And if the answer is no, I'm doing it. But if the answer is yes, no, I'm not being on the news. So if you don't want to be in the news, you don't want to have a security incident because the news loves a security incident at the moment. We use TFSec and Trivy in our pipelines, but there are so many tools you can use based on whatever stack you're using, heaps of them. And lots of them are free as well. So TFSec and Trivy is free. It used to be called TFSec, it's called Trivy now. So I put both just so you can find all the blogs and stuff about it. That goes directly into our pipeline for a PR and says, hey, you've got, TLS 1.1 turned on. You can't have that, for example. And I also love Dependabot, which is free, and you can enable it in all your repos straight away, and it creates PRs for you based on vulnerabilities and security updates. And I have a little video of one of our repos here. I think this is Jake's, where he has a Dependabot enabled. It has a bunch of pull requests that it's made for him saying, hey, you need to update this, you need to update that. You can go and review it. It gives you all the details. It says what's involved. And if you like that, you can just merge it in and it fixes it. So it's like having a security person in your team checking your security for you. And I'm pretty sure, and Stuart is at the back, so I better get this right, that the new version actually can collate those pull requests together so you don't have that many. You can just have like a grouped pull request for stuff. And Jake did also say that he loves that you can ignore stuff. So he's like, I love Log4j vulnerabilities. I'm never going to have it notify me about those ever again. So I guess the thing here is there's two things you can do. Use those tools that are just like available to you right now and use those linters, but also ask your platform teams or ask yourself to integrate security into your platforms and your templates and those paved paths for you. So it's not something you have to consider. It's built in. Work proactively. We made it. So in summary, we talked about the Cloud Adoption Framework intro. We talked about the well-architected pillars. We sort of covered why they exist. And then I said, could we maybe shift left and reduce friction between our teams and align our goals? And then we talked about considering early collaboration and using those templates and paved paths and infrastructure as code and all the built-in gates and all the stuff that's available to you right now. We talked about how to benchmark how well architected you are. And if you go do it, please tell me how you found it and what your score was. I'd love to follow your journey to a well-architected platform. And we talked about some ideas for shifting left. So do we have well-architected workloads to start with? Can we keep them well-architected? And can we make it easier for the dev teams to do that and not more cognitive load? And we learned that Skims didn't do any of that stuff. I want to say thanks for having me along. It's been so long since I've been out in public, so it's really nice to be here. Thanks for coming to my talk. Please pick green when you go outside. And I did a wellness check on Michaela, and I think she got her dog matching outfit. So don't worry about Michaela. She didn't have a full-blown mentee bee. All is well. So you can find me on Blue Sky, you can find me on LinkedIn, and if we have time, I'm happy for questions, else I'll just hang around. Thank you. Is there any questions? No? Okay. Don't be shy. You can I don't know, I'm not going to say skeet because I think that's weird, but, oh yeah, we have one down the back. As in what stack? Or what pillar? I think performance is hard because oftentimes it involves refactoring or digging into like a whole application stack, and everybody's like, oh no, we can't touch that, or that runs on a machine that somebody left under their desk and they left, or it's like, just don't touch it. And you're like, but it's, awful. So yeah, like you've got to get past that whole, like, maybe we can refactor it. There's a lot of, and it's like some mission critical thing that they use millions of dollars when it gets turned off or something. I see a lot of familiar faces. That's always a hard discussion to have. But with new PaaS platforms, it is possible, but that's a hard one too. And also like when I used to say to my boss, I can make it more performance efficient, or I can make it more reliable so we're not working weekends. It's like, what do I care? I already pay you. Like, he doesn't make any, there's no difference in the money he pays if that's well architected or not. Whereas the cost one, it's like really tangible for him and he did care about that. He was joking, but like, when they're like half joking, he was like that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. If I want to do a proof of concept of well architected, if you want
to do a proof of concept, right? You want to lower the cost as much as possible.
Yeah.
What are the main things that you will think of that this is a must?
When you're building an application, proof of concept?
Just to have a proof of concept, because you want to go as free as possible, right?
Yeah. And that's a lot of the ISVs, or I should say like startups that we work with. They just need minimal cost, right, to get this thing up and show it to investors and stuff. I would say doing things like using dev test subscriptions, which are much cheaper. But don't use them for anything important, but they're really good for proof of concepts. Having stuff spin up and shut down when you're not using it. So you're only doing that proof of concept for an hour demo maybe, or when you're developing on it. Don't just leave it running all the time. It doesn't need to be. And then use Azure Advisor. So go into Azure Advisor cost optimizations and it will say literally like, here's the CPU graph for this VM. You're using 3% for the whole month. Do you want to resize it to this size? And you go, yep. And it just resizes it and it tells you how much you're going to save. Is that a good enough answer? Not really. He's like 50-50. What did you want to know?
Like, do you consider like adding security layers or building the full pipelines, like all of those things even for the proof of concept?
I mean, I'm an infrastructure kid, so yeah, I'm like, it needs to be secure and it needs to be infrastructure as code. But there's no harm in ClickOpsing something, which is what I do when I try to build new code for something. I go, how does this thing work? And I build it in the portal and then I write it as code. It's much faster to do that and easier to see, it gives me this weird error that you don't get in the pipeline, by the way. Like you just don't understand why it doesn't work. So yeah, build it. But at some point you want to be able to rebuild that, right? Like if you mess it up, you want to be able to go, revert and rebuild. You don't want to have to start from the start. So yeah.
Thanks.
How do I get 100% now in the answer? I got a thumbs up. Okay, well, I think that's us, but I'm happy to hang around if there's any more. Just ask me questions online. And if you have tools that I missed that are amazing, please tell me so I can steal them for the next time I give this talk. Thank you so much.